You know, the longer you have to wait, the more it seems like you've been forgotten. That's usually the way it goes, isn't it? When my wife and I were expecting our first baby, it seemed like we spent the entire 9 months in the waiting room. I might be exaggerating just a little bit, but it seemed as though every 20 or 30 minutes we were driving to the doctor's office. And you know the drill. You show up, you sign in, and you sit. And you wait. And while you might flip through a magazine, clean out your wallet, or strike up a conversation with the person next to you, you're really just waiting. Waiting to be seen, waiting to be healed, waiting to get the good news or the troubling report. And no matter how many nice people or issues of Sports Illustrated you might encounter, you're just waiting. And the more you wait, the more it seems you've been forgotten. You know, there are a lot of people who feel the same way about God. There are a lot of people who feel like they have shown up, signed in, and sat down, and they're just waiting for God to answer. And I've been there myself. You know, life is moving on around them, and they're just waiting for God to peek his head around the corner and call their name. They're waiting to be healed, to be heard, to get the good news of the troubling report from him. The more they have to wait, the more they feel like he's forgotten about them. Maybe that's you. The book of Psalms in the Old Testament has been the song book for God's people since way, way back in the day, since about 1,000 years before Jesus was born. And it's full of songs and prayers for just about everything that you can think of, some that will even surprise you. Take Psalm 13, for example. It's a psalm written by David when he was just sick and tired of waiting. He was so sick and tired, in fact, that he goes as far as to accuse God of completely forgetting about him. And in fact, he gets pretty bold with God, saying, "How long? How long? How long? How long will you forget me?" And what surprises most people about that psalm when they read it is how bold David gets with God, that he would ask him 4 times, "How long?" I mean, it's like when you've been waiting somewhere for a really long time and everybody starts to get restless. And then there's that one guy who has the guts to go up to the window and say really loudly, "Hey, we're all still here." And part of you on the inside is like, "Right on." And then the other part's like, "I'm not with him." Well, David's that guy. He's tired of waiting. He's tired of being restless. And so on behalf of all of us, he gets up the guts and he goes to God and he says, "How long?" The key thing to notice is that David doesn't stay in question mode forever. I mean, the psalm is basically broken up into 3 sections. David goes from questioning God to praying to God to finally trusting God. Yet when it comes to our waiting, a lot of us never get past the question stage. You know, you and I would get hung up in the whens and the whys and the hows, and we never see the other side. We never get to the really good stuff. You see, what David teaches us in Psalm 13, what you and I need to learn, is that if our questioning never leads to prayers that lead to trust, then we're going to be tapping our toes and checking the clocks for what seems like an eternity. And you will never know any peace. You see, for David, trust, that's the ultimate issue. Because when you've been waiting and you feel like you've been forgotten, the one who needs to do the remembering is not God, but me. Take a look at this. In the second to last verse of the psalm, it says, "I will trust in your steadfast love." Now, steadfast love is actually just one word in Hebrew. It's a word called chesed. And it's not just any word. It's really the most important word, the most important idea in the Hebrew faith. Maybe that's why it's mentioned over 195 times in the Old Testament alone. And so to speak of chesed was not to speak of just God's love, but to speak of his his perfect record of faithfulness. It was his history of always showing up right on time and giving his people exactly what they needed, showering them in exactly what they were longing for. To trust in Chesed was to trust in God's legendary love that always, always keeps up his side of the bargain. To trust in Chesed was to trust in the fact that God always, always keeps his promises. In the early days of Christianity, a guy named Paul was writing to a church that was wrestling with waiting. And in comforting them, he almost quotes Psalm 13. But instead, this is what he says. He says, "May the Lord direct your hearts to God's love and to the steadfastness of Christ." But do you see the connection? You see, Jesus, with his perfect life that I could not live, with him dying the death that I deserve, and the forgiveness that he gives us is God's ultimate form of chesed. God's ultimate form of keeping up his side of the bargain and God keeping his promises. And so when I feel like God's forgotten me, when I'm sick and tired of waiting, that is what I hold to. That's what I remember. I hang on to that chesed. I hang on to Jesus. It's the ultimate sign that God has not forgotten me, that God has, God is, and God will answer his promises. And the ultimate proof of that is the cross. You know, there's an ancient Jewish saying that says every believer should carry two pieces of paper in their pockets. One in the left that says, "I am but dust and ashes," and one in the right that says, "For me the world was created." The goal of the first one was to keep you grounded, to remind you that you're maybe not as important as you think you are, that your life's not going to last forever, and that perhaps your troubles are light in comparison to others. You're but dust and ashes. Definitely something to remember while you wait. Now, the purpose of the other one was to remind you that while that other one might be true, you are still what God says is his greatest creation, and for you, he created it all, the earth and everything in it. You are valued, you are loved, and believe it or not, you are not forgotten. For you, the world was created. You know, maybe an even better one for us would be, "For me, he was crucified." Definitely something to remember while you wait. You know, there are a lot of us who feel like we have shown up, signed in, and sat down, and have been waiting for God for a long time, for him to show up and to peek his head around the corner and to call our name. For some of us, we have been waiting so long that we're wondering if we have been forgotten. You know, but sometimes what God does for us in waiting, growing us in prayer, in trust, and in love, is as important as what we're waiting for itself. As you wait, may you be bold enough to question, but may your questions lead to prayers that give way to trust in God's steadfast love. As you wonder if you've been forgotten, may you remember his goodness. May you hold tight to his hesed, to his cross. And when you are found, may you rejoice in the fact that God has been there all along.